It's time to take a journey back in time. Back when the world just got its hands on the iPad. An Icelandic volcano named... how to pronounce...
Eyjafjallajökull. Eyjafjallajökull.
Eyjafjallajökull. You piece of shit. Anyway, a volcano I can't pronounce erupted, clouding the sky and grounding flights across Europe. There was also this catastrophic explosion in the Gulf of Mexico on the Deepwater Horizon, which, as you guys know, 6 years later inspired a movie by the same name to cast Marky Mark as the heroic Mike Williams. Speaking of movies, there was also a limited release of Afterlife. You probably didn't hear of it, but apparently it stars Qui-Gon Jinn, who I guess had a particular set of skills he had acquired over a long career. Made him a nightmare for the Matt guy in Wednesday Addams. I don't even know what it was about. I mean, this was April 2010. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. So during all of this crazy madness, there was a game that was released. An action-adventure stealth game developed by Ubisoft Montreal as part of the Tom Clancy Splinter Cell series. This was an established game franchise with 4 major Splinter Cell releases preceding it. What's significant about the 5th game in a 6-game series? Welcome back, everybody. So you're probably wondering why we're talking about an 11-year-old game. Well, I've been around for a while, and I don't need to get into the details, but I was here when we were introduced to the greats. You know, Samus, Sonic the Hedgehog, the Super Mario Brothers, Link, Zelda. I was there when the same code that got you continues in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 was the same code that got you 30 extra lives in Contra. Cowabunga! I was here for the Nintendo and Sega console wars. Heck, I was even here for the first-person shooter. So it got me thinking, are games back then as good as we remember? What trends did they start that we still see today? I'll be releasing these videos about every month or so. If this is something you'd like to see more of, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell to be notified of new videos. Now you guys ready? Let's go back in time.
The thing you have to understand is this. The Sam Fisher you knew is dead. America killed him, asked him to make one sacrifice too many, cross one line too far.
Well, Sam wasn't dead quite yet. After 4 years of delays and waiting, Splinter Cell Conviction launched as a PC and Xbox exclusive. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but Conviction was also the last Sam Fisher Splinter Cell to feature Michael Ironside as the voice of Sam Fisher.
You're Fisher, right? Anna told me that you were coming. I was a big fan of yours back when you worked here. I was a big fan.
His voice was Sam Fisher.
Then again, that was pure Sam.
3 years later, Blacklist was released and was the last official Splinter Cell, attempting to return to its roots with more stealth gameplay and replacing Ironside with Eric Johnson. Back in 2010, when Conviction was released, it took a few too many steps away from the strict stealth gameplay mechanics of its predecessors. Instead, it introduced the Mark and Execute mode that allowed a single button insta-kill after earning it through a takedown. Additionally, missions didn't rely as heavily on stealth to succeed, and many times you could simply shoot your way out. These moves were divisive at the time, but the game was still a great package, and a lot more approachable to non-stealth game players. The in-game mode, this time, wasn't just a squeezed-in multiplayer mode either. It was a completely fleshed out, upgradable and replayable mission mode called Deniable Ops. This game mode provided a satisfying upgrade path and a lot of replayability. With seemingly endless options to set up missions, you could really ratchet up the difficulty if you wanted some of that throwback stealthy challenge. Now, just 8 years before this, we were introduced to Sam Fisher in the first installment Splinter Cell Splinter Cell Stealth Action Redefined. And it was truly that, stealth action redefined. With moves like the split jump, lockpicking, and shooting out lights, the levels provided you a lot of options to approach any encounter just the way you felt like a true spy. When Splinter Cell released in 2002, Metal Gear was the stealth action game everyone else wanted to be, and for good reason. I still remember playing Metal Gear Solid for the first time. It hit all the notes of a great stealth game. But Splinter Cell struck a chord that Metal Gear never would. It launched very shortly after 9/11. Sam Fisher, as a covert operative with military background, was well timed to catapult this game into the mainstream. Yeah, America! Back in 2010, Conviction, like many other games of that time, were victims of the live service, multiplayer, in-game focused wave of games. What? Did I just make up a new genre? My point is, Conviction focused less on what made Splinter Cell great, and more on what publishers thought would sell more units. This focus on action and a reason to keep playing after the campaign was over was still being explored by a lot of companies at the time. While not an outright bad idea, the games that straddled both the new game-as-a-service model and single-player campaigns rarely figured out how to do both really well. Splinter Cell Conviction was a critical hit in 2010. Now, although the controls were a bit wonky for a keyboard mouse player in 2021, the story is satisfying, the gameplay mechanics are solid, if a little simplified, and the graphics are surprisingly good for an 11-year-old game. Alright folks, that's the video. Now don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, so let's get into a little bit more detail. The story. So I was immediately impressed with the menus when first launching the game. In fact, I spent a lot of time in the menus already, and this just enticed me to fish through the menus even more than I already do. After fiddling with the resolution settings and getting everything set up, I quickly was thrown into the game's interesting yet corny narrative.
Irving Lambert died by Sam's hand that day. And so did Sam. So he left. Left Third Echelon, left the life he knew, left America and Mom and apple pie, left it all behind. He hopped off the grid and went walkabout, looking for a reason to go on living.
One notable piece was the tracking of objectives. This was built right into the game using the surface of walls to describe your next steps. Similarly, the game used this narrative trick to reduce the need for cutaway scenes during gameplay. From the beginning, it explains the current Sam Fisher scenario. Again, a bit corny, it doesn't require you to have played any of the previous games to understand your motivation. In fact, in the previous game, Double Agent, the player can make the choice not to kill Lambert. So this is truly the darkest timeline. We catch up with Sam in Malta, in a city called Valletta. And for those of you that remember the past in rose-colored glasses, the camera shake in the cutscenes puts Outriders to shame.
Sam.
Who is this? How'd you find me?
Give me a little credit, Sam. Don't tell me you don't recognize my voice even after all this time.
The story beats set up each gameplay section pretty well. It was sufficient to keep me interested in moving forward. I barely cared for any of the characters, but I wanted to see how the story would end, and certainly see the level of complexity of each new mission. Conviction's gameplay, while similar, removed some of the big mainstays from the previous games. The hacking mechanic is non-existent, no lock-picking to be found, and Sam couldn't even move an unconscious body to hide it from the rest of the NPCs on patrol. However, the levels were varied and introduced some new mechanics that kept me playing. One level had Sam controlling a camera. My skill at focusing on my targets influenced my ability to hear them, and it was really good fun.
Clip requisitions here, now. The site's clean, and I knew you'd be here since your company did the setup on the Samson speech.
Now you can approach most missions stealthily or guns blazing, with a few levels requiring Sam not to be spotted at all. These were both the most challenging and most rewarding parts of the game. I failed. A lot.
They know you're there. It's over. Forget it, Sam. They know you're there and the building's going into lockdown.
That's Fisher! Light him up! Ready to die?
Forget it, Sam. They know you're there and the building's going into lockdown.
You ain't got a chance!
The building's going into lockdown. They know you're there. It's over.
Fisher, get some!
Damn it! You've been detected. They've locked the building down.
Can't get away that easy!
Spoopy. However, for much of the rest of the game, the forgiving gameplay saved me more than a few times, as I would often start the level intending not to be spotted and end up shooting my way out. New to the franchise was mark and execute and interrogation mechanics. So to earn the right to set up a mark and execute shot, you'd first have to take out a target at close range with some sort of hand-to-hand combat. I found this mechanic helpful early in the game, but later forgot that it even existed. As the game didn't rely heavily on staying in the shadows, it was often far easier to shoot your way through a mission even when the hostiles far outnumbered you. The interrogation mechanic was a lot of fun as well. First introduced early in the game in a dirty bathroom, my imagination ran wild knowing that Sam would bash the victim's head into the nearest surface. It really encouraged you to look around to see how your victims' bodies might be used to knock out some sensitive equipment or break some glass. The game slowly trickled out upgrades to your weapons and introduced new gadgets as missions went on. During the campaign, upgrades to my weapons felt obsolete after the first few enhancements. Because I always wanted to go into a mission using my trusty silenced pistol, the other upgrades were redundant. It wasn't until later when playing the Deniable Ops mode that the upgrades made more sense. I then immediately burned through all of my upgrades to increase my effectiveness. The stealth mechanic, although toned down, was represented by the screen desaturating to black and white, showing that Sam was in cover. Now, I didn't totally hate this, but I did find myself missing Sam disappearing into the darkness and trusting that what you saw is what the NPCs saw. That tension was really missed. You could always see Sam in the game, but had to believe that NPCs couldn't see him when the screen was black and white. It just didn't make a lot of sense. The overall look and feel of Conviction were well executed. For an 11-year-old game, the graphics were surprisingly good. Lighting was also adequate despite my small but important issue with the fact that there was no complete blackout sections of any level, despite the game featuring an HDR option. I was also surprised to find 1440p was supported. Again, having the benefit of history on my side, I was very impressed with the environments inside and out. I even took a few minutes to admire the streets of DC as I often do in The Division 2.
That ain't the guard, man. That's the Black Arrow or some shit. Some private merc company.
I wonder how much of this art direction inspired future games. Now, one really weird point that I can't believe I'm even having to mention or bring up is more of a design choice maybe. The overly exaggerated boom animation of Anna Grimsdottir. I mean, first of all, look at the jacket. It's a tight leather jacket. Is this even something physically possible? And second, it's not like she was jogging or jumping. She's casually walking behind Sam, and they look like they're attached by springs. Yikes. Again, 2010. Controls. So as with many games, the tutorial at the beginning did a good job of explaining the controls. It took some getting used to use the mouse and keyboard controls, and it almost felt like an afterthought, second to the controller setup. Now admittedly, I didn't take a lot of time to dig around into the mouse keyboard controls or the keybinds, but standards that most modern games offer just didn't seem to exist. I often found myself expecting my character to do one thing and ended up doing something else, which either led to me being exposed or hitting a fail scenario. Nothing really game-breaking, it's just something that I needed to get used to. So how does this game stack up 11 years later? Despite some of my small complaints, I find this game still completely relevant and viable today. Remember, Splinter Cell was born from a post-9/11 culture. Sam Fisher always demanded respect, and I'd say he earns it in this outing. Although Conviction is missing some of the fun stealth features of its predecessors, and even Blacklist following it, I think this is the most approachable game in the series. It has just enough stealth to get you hooked, but also forgiving enough not to be too challenging that you give up. The Deniable Ops in-game mode and the equipment upgrade pathing make the game an easy choice to come back to time and time again. Deniable Ops provides the ability to increase the challenge requiring stealth to complete missions, and alternatively, the ability to bottom out the challenge and run and gun into any situation. That brings us to a close. I appreciate you guys checking this out, and as I mentioned, I'll be releasing these on a monthly basis. If you have an idea for a game you'd like to see me cover, drop a comment down below. If you want to see more of this and notified when I release new content, remember to subscribe and hit that bell. Thanks again for watching, and remember, never pre-order games. Bye everyone.